everyone, to Daf Yomi 1 week at a time. This is our first lesson in Masechet Sanhedrin, and we are beginning a new Masechet in the Seder, in the larger book of Nizikin. Which means, nezek means damages, but the entire book, larger Seder is called Nizikin, and we are going to deal with things that have to do with Jewish law. So we just finished our 3 Masechtot of Baba Kama, Baba Metzia, and Baba Batra. And now we are going to be beginning Masechet Sanhedrin. And in this Masechet, we are going to learn about the Jewish court system. We are going to see that there are 3 different structures or 3 different types of Jewish courts. And I brought for you a picture made by Rabbi Natan Farber. There's a lot of Hebrew on it. You don't have to read all the words, but basically there are 3 types of courts. Hold on a second. I hope everyone can see. Hopefully you can all see the picture. There are 3 types of courts. And we're going to go through the first Mishnah talks about all 3 types. The first one is made up of 3 judges. That is the lower court. The next court is a court made up of 23 judges. And the last one is called the Great Sanhedrin, and that is made up of 71 judges. So we're going to go through each one of these things. We're going to discuss which type of case is judged by which type of court. And then we'll go through, obviously, many more details throughout this Masechet. So let's begin. We're starting on Daf 2. Just to remind ourselves, every Masechet begins on page 2 or Bet, because we say, right, there's no beginning and there's no end to the Torah. It's as if we've already been learning it. And for many of us, we have been learning it for a long time. For some of us, we are new. So welcome to all the people who are just joining now. So we are starting on Daf 2 or Daf Bet. So the Mishnah tells us that monetary cases are judged with 3 judges, which means, and if you remember, we just finished discussing in Baba Batra the different types of, right, loans, right, you owe me $100. Oh no, I only owe you 50. What are you talking about? Right, all of those cases in Hebrew, it's called dinei mamonot. Anything that has to do with mammon. Mammon means money. Anything that has to do with money, 3 judges are enough. And the Gemara is going to explain how we know each one of these things. Theft or injury goes to a court of 3 judges. Damages, penalties, anything that you have to pay back. If you remember in Baba Kama, we learned that if someone gets injured, you have to pay back a certain amount. If someone steals, right, you have to pay back a certain amount. This is all seen in a court of 3 judges. If someone is brought to court because of rape, or he seduced a woman, or something that's called motzi shem ra, we're going to talk about it and explain what that is in a few minutes. Again, that is 3 judges. Or maybe motzi shem ra, we're going to see in the Gemara, there's a machloket. Maybe actually you have to go to a court of 23 judges, because we're going to see that capital cases, in Hebrew it's called dinei nefashot, right? A nefesh is a soul, right? So anything that is a capital case must go before a court of 23 judges. If someone is liable for lashes, so then maybe 3 judges are enough, or maybe 23. The Gemara is going to explain this machloket. If you're calculating an extra day in the month, 3 judges are enough. If you're calculating an extra month, right, what we call a leap year, 3 judges are enough. Or maybe you start with 3 and then you continue with 5 judges and you finish with 7. And again, the Gemara is going to explain all of this. If the elders need to bring a sacrifice because they taught a like a wrong law, or if they have to do what's called egla arufa, that is when a person is found dead between 2 cities. We're not sure which city is responsible. We do a certain ceremony that is done with 3 judges, or maybe with 5 judges. Chalitza, the chalitza ceremony. Remember, we learned about if a man dies without any children, right? He's married, he doesn't have any children. The wife can either marry his brother or choose to do chalitza, a ceremony, or mi'un. Mi'un, if you remember, is when a girl who is a minor is sold or married off to someone, and she decides she doesn't want to be married anymore. She can do mi'un. Again, this is done in front of 3 judges. Okay, if we need to appraise ma'aser, right, things, right, the tithes, so then that could be done by 3 judges. Also, for some, if you need to appraise something that was sanctified, something that was made kadosh, again, 3 judges. And the Mishnah says maybe one of them needs to be a kohen, needs to be a priest. Let's say we are assessing land that was sanctified. Here the Mishnah says you need 9 men plus 1 kohen. So meaning you need 10. One of them has to be a priest. As we said, capital cases. So you see in the middle, 3 judges. All of those things were 3 judges. Now we're going to 23 judges. Capital cases are judged by 23 judges. Again, it's very serious. Therefore, we need more judges. If we have to judge a case of an animal that was sodomized, again, 23 judges. If an ox killed a person, again, 23 judges. If a wild animal killed a person, 23 judges. Or the Mishnah says, or just kill that wild animal. Why are you taking it to court? Just kill it. So of course, the Gemara is going to discuss this in greater detail. If there is a court case against an entire tribe or a city or a false prophet, now we're going to get to the Sanhedrin, which is the court of 71, right? Anything that, I guess you can call it the Supreme Court, right? This was the Sanhedrin. This was for very serious cases. If we are deciding if we should go out to war, we go to the Sanhedrin, the court of 71. If you want to expand the walls of Jerusalem, you go to the Sanhedrin of 71. And the Sanhedrin of 71 would also go out and they would appoint the lesser courts in other cities. So they were in charge of the judicial system in the country. If you have a city that many of the people in the city are Jewish and they worshipped idols, this is what's called an ir nidachat. This is a city that is, again, we'll see it not this week, but maybe next week. It's a capital case, but it's very serious. Again, we go to the court of Everyone still there?
We're there. We're here.
Okay. 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 The Ir Nidachat is a city where many people worshipped idols. They're Jews, and the law is that that city needs to be destroyed. The Mishnah tells us that that city cannot be on the border of Israel. Right? We all know the importance of border cities. And therefore, that city is not destroyed, right? It'll weaken the country. Okay, then we say, okay, so now the Mishnah explains that the Sanhedrin, or the large, right, the great assembly, right, the large Sanhedrin is made up of 71 people. This is based on a verse. We know that Moshe gathered 70 elders in the desert in order to help him judge the people, right? So we have 70 elders plus Moshe, therefore we get 71. Another opinion is no, the Sanhedrin is only made up of 70 because that's how many elders there were, 70. The court of 23 is called a Sanhedrin Ktana, right? A small Sanhedrin. This is learnt from, you can see there's the verses up on top, it's in Hebrew, but there's a verse that talks about the community, the Eidah. An Eidah, we are taught means 10 people. It says Eidah twice, right? So 10 and 10 is 20. Hold on for the 3 for 1 minute. How do we know that Eidah means 10 people? Hold on. Are you still there?
We're still here.
Okay. No, I see the picture goes off, so I don't know if it's my internet that's going in and out. Okay. The story of the spies, we know that 2 of them, right, Yoshua and Caleb, speak positively, which leaves us with 10 bad spies, right? And they are called an Eidah, right? And the Eidah is 10. This is actually the source for minyan, right? The fact that we need 10 men for a minyan is learnt from this, from the fact that you need an Eidah, which is 10 people, 10 men. Okay, so we just said, it says the word Eidah twice for capital cases. That gives us 20 people, plus we need 3 more people, right, to make 23. Why do we need 3 more people? Now, we know that we have to go according to a majority. Therefore, we cannot have an even court, right? So you can't have 20, that would be 10 and 10. We also don't want it to be 21 so that it's only a majority of 1 person, because we feel that if it's a capital case, it should be a bigger majority. Therefore, so it can't be 21, it can't be 22 because then it's even. Therefore, we get to 23. So that's how we get 23 for the small, right? The small Sanhedrin. The Gemara says that, sorry, one more thing with the Mishnah, you need to have at least 120 people in a city to have a court of 23 people, right? This idea, either 120 or 230. Maybe we need 10 people for every judge, but this is explaining which cities got which types of courts. Okay, that was the Mishnah. It was very lengthy. Let's go to the Gemara. We started by saying that Dinei Mamonot, monetary law or monetary cases, need to be seen by 3 judges. We said this is for theft, for injuries, maybe not for loans, right? The verse says you need 3 judges for theft and for injury. Maybe for a loan, you don't need, maybe it's different for a loan. What could be the difference? Maybe you don't need them to be experts. Maybe it could be just three random people, right? You go to your neighbors and you say, "Oh, I have a case where I owe or someone owes me money. I need the three of you to listen to this case." You still need three people, but maybe they don't have to be experts. The Gemara says, no, we really do need experts for loans, but there is a distinction between monetary law and capital cases and loans, because these cases need, we need to investigate the witnesses. In Hebrew, the term for investigation is drisha and chakira, right? These are two words. We're going to learn the difference between them at the end of either at the end of today or next week. But basically, the judges would ask certain types of questions to the witnesses, and based on the severity of the court or of the case, that determines how how deep the questions needed to be. Now, we don't want people to stop lending money. Remember, we spoke about this previously, that we want to make sure that people will lend money. Therefore, we say, you know what? We don't have to ask too many questions when we're dealing with loans. Therefore, you don't need expert judges for the loans, but you can have three regular people sit in judgment. However, we're going to learn that if you're not an expert and you are going to be a judge, if you make a mistake, you need to pay that mistake, right? You pay if you make a mistake, right? Because you made a mistake and you weren't an expert. So now the Gemara tells us that really, according to the Torah, you only need one judge for loans. But again, a person might ask a random person to judge his case, and we don't know if he knows any of the laws. Therefore, we say, you know what? You need three people, right? If you get three people together, right, the Gemara actually says, right, you get three people together, at least one of them will know the law. And therefore it will be okay. And again, as we said, you do take liability if you are going to sit in judgment. And therefore, if you make a mistake, you do have to pay for that mistake that you made. Okay, the Gemara tells us that really two judges are valid, but they're called an insolent court, right? A chatzuf court, meaning really you should not have two people. We should always have a minimum of three people sitting in judgment. Okay, we also said that for injury, you need three judges. And the Gemara says, why did it have to mention injury separately? That is monetary law. So the Gemara says, because we also talk about penalties, right? What we call in Hebrew knas. Knas means a penalty, right? If remember, we learned if someone steals, they have to pay back not only what they stole, but they have to pay back double the value, right? Or if you have to pay back 4 times or 5 times, those are penalties, and that needed a separate category. They still need only 3 judges. How do we know that we need 3 judges? The Gemara tells us that there are 3 verses that teach about judges. Therefore, right, shofet, 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 3 times the word, right, judge, and therefore 3 judges. Or, wait a minute, if you can't learn from the first verse, because the first verse we have to learn the actual law, therefore we only have 2, right? But 2, as we said, we don't want it to be even, and therefore we add 1 and we get 3. The Gemara tells us that there's actually a machloket, right, a disagreement. If the first time the law is taught, are we allowed to use some of those words to understand a deeper law, or not. And here, right, we have the concept of, right, it says, right, lean towards majority, right? It teaches that a court must be uneven, right? For a majority, we want to make sure that the court is uneven and not even, right? Or odd, right? Or the Gemara says, no, maybe it could be even, but, right, again, you can still have a majority with an even number of people. And that's actually a machloket, as we saw before, was the Great Sanhedrin 70 or 71? We said that you need 5 judges for Egla Arufa. Again, Egla Arufa was when a city is seen as being responsible for someone that was killed outside of their city limit, and they do a ceremony at like a riverbed near their city. So we need 5 judges. How do you know 5? Again, the verse says in plural, right, twice. Again, plural meaning 2. 2 plus 2 is 4. As we said, it can't be even. Therefore, we have 5. Okay, then the Gemara says, well, maybe capital cases need to be odd number of judges, but maybe monetary cases could be an even number of judges. And the Gemara says, no, we always need an odd number of judges. Rebbe says that we need 5 judges for monetary cases. Again, why 5? Again, we said that we only need 3. Rebbe's of the opinion, he has a different opinion. He says 5. Why 5? Because he wants it to be a majority of 3 versus 2, not 2 versus 1. And he says you need to have at least 3 people that agree with the verdict. Okay. Again, okay. Now on Daf 4. So before was Daf 3. I don't know if I said that. Daf number 4, Daf Dalid. The rabbis again learn from different verses. They learn 3 judges and not 5 judges. From here, the Gemara talks about, it's a very interesting, I don't want to say it's a little off topic, but it's a different topic. The Gemara talks about the weight that we give to the words written in the Torah. I don't know if you know, but right in the Torah, there are certain times where words are written one way, but they're pronounced a different way. And the question is, what is the, I don't want to use the word, correct way to see that word? Why is that important? Because the question is, do we, again, what does the Gemara do? It extrapolates laws and ideas based on what it said, what's written in the Torah. And here there's a machloket on Daf 4. What do we give more precedence to? The way we read the word or the way it's written? And it's just a very fascinating concept. The Gemara brings numerous examples where the word is written one way but read a different way. And how do we understand that word, right? So, for example, it talks about Sukkot, but it has the word, right? Sukkot could be written with a vav, which makes it like plural, or without a vav, which sounds like Sukkat or Sukkat, right? What is something, right? Something like that, which means, right, more singular as opposed to plural, right? And from here, the Gemara learns, right, how many walls does a sukkah have, right? This is good. Review for anyone who's been learning with me for a while. We learned in Masechet Sukkah, how many walls does a sukkah need, right? So if you're going to look at the way it was, are you going to look at the way it was written or the way it is read, right? So does a sukkah need, right, 3 plus walls, right, or 2 plus walls, right? Meaning the way we understand it, and then we go through understanding basically based on the way we read it or the way it is written. The Gemara gives like at least 5 different examples, right? It talks about you're not allowed to cook meat and milk together. Now, milk is chalav, but there's also a word called that's read chalev. It's written the same way, but chalev means fat, right? The fat. We don't use it in modern Hebrew, but chalev is the fats of an animal. So the Gemara says, how do we know if it's supposed to be chalav or chalev? Right? Again, we have a tradition that it's read chalav, and therefore that is the way we read it. So the Gemara goes through all of these explanations on the way the word is written and the way the word is read. Okay, now the Gemara tells us on Daf 5 that we need, sometimes we need an expert judge. This is called a mumche or a mumche. Right, a mumche is an expert, and sometimes, in certain cases, an expert judge can judge alone. And the Gemara gives examples of certain sages that judged on their own. And these judges got authorization from a greater rabbi, right? It was important to recognize that someone said that these rabbis had the authority to judge these cases. And now the Gemara gives examples of people who were not experts, who judged on their own, and they made a mistake, and therefore you have to be very careful when you sit in judgment, right? So the Gemara gives an example on Daf 5. Marzutra's son judged alone, and he made a mistake. And then he said, listen, if the people accept, and then they went to court and they said, what should we do? They said, if the people accepted you as a judge, you don't need to pay because they elected you to be the judge. So they took on that responsibility. If not, then you have to pay, right? And now the Gemara goes through many different verses that teach the importance and the severity of being a judge, right? So they say, if you want to be a judge and not be liable for a mistake, so then get permission from the Reish Galuta, right? The Reish Galuta was the exilarch, right? The leader of the Jewish community in the exile, and if he gave permission or authority to this judge, so then he does not have to pay if he makes a mistake. If you get now the Gemara talks about, let's say you got permission from someone, a rabbi in Bavel, right, in Babylon, and then in Babylonia, and then you decide to go to Israel. Can you be a judge there, right? This reminds me of, right, when people take the bar in New York, doesn't mean that you can be a lawyer in Israel, right? And vice versa, right? You have to know maybe the customs of the community. So here the Gemara tells us that if a person got permission in Bavel and goes to Israel, that's valid. Again, don't forget, we're learning the Babylonian Talmud. So right in the Babylonian Talmud, the Babylonians are on a higher level, and therefore that's the best type of permission or authority that you can get. Therefore, if you go to Israel, you could still be a judge. Right, again, Bavel had more power. What about if you go from Israel to Bavel? So the Gemara gives a story of Rabba Bar Chana, who got permission from Israel, and then he went and he judged in Bavel. So the Gemara says, no, that wasn't effective, and he was liable to pay for any mistakes. Or maybe it does work. And then Gemara says, no, it doesn't work. He got permission in Israel, And if you get permission in Israel, that gives you the ability to judge in the border towns, but not in Bavel. Okay. And then what is this what is this permission that they get? So the Gemara says the greater rabbi asks this person who wants to be the judge, right? Can you Can you judge this type of case, right? So the Gemara gives the example. You ask Yore, right? Yore means are you proficient in the laws of things that are permissible and things that are prohibited? And the person says Yore, yes, right? He says Yadin, right? Can you sit in a judgment for monetary cases? And he says Yadin, right? And therefore, actually, if you look at a smicha document, right, of your local Orthodox rabbi, it should say that they get Yore Yore, right? If they've learned the laws of, right, what is prohibited and what is permitted, it's called Yore Yore, right? That's what this comes from. If the person studied more and can be a judge, so they get something called Yadin Yadin, right? That means that they can be a dayan, right? Dayan means judge. So that comes from this daf 5 in Masechet Sanhedrin. Okay, so now we have some stories. 1 second. Okay, so now we have some stories, right? Rabbi Chia called Rabba Bar Chana. He called him my brother's son. And then he called Rav his sister's son. Now you'd be like, okay, fine. But really, the Gemara tells us that both of them were really his brother's and his sister's son. Basically, Rabbi Chia had a very complicated family. He had half sister and a half brother, and therefore he calls them different, like by different names. The Gemara says maybe it's because of their wisdom, right? If you're right, wisdom is called a sister, achot, and therefore Rav had greater wisdom. Therefore, he was called his sister's son. We see that Rav wasn't allowed to permit the firstborn animals. And then you think, oh, wait, why not? Did he not know the laws? So one option is because he didn't have expertise in blemishes. He didn't know how to rule about blemishes. The Gemara says, no, he actually did know about blemishes, but he didn't need the extra honor, and he was actually a real expert. But because he was such an expert, it was dangerous to have him rule because maybe he would be overly stringent. So as we said, we have the concept of Yore Yore, and the Gemara says it's very important for community rabbis to make sure that they have proficiency in the law, and that they're very careful, precise, right? That they're trained to teach. Why? So the Gemara gives a story of, right, Rebbe saw people kneading dough in impure utensils, and they thought that it was okay. Why? Because a student came to town, and sorry, 1 second. A student came to town and taught them something, but he didn't teach it in the right way. He didn't communicate it well. So they say, you have to be very careful that if you're going to teach law, you have to have what we call nowadays smicha, right? You're trained and you know exactly what you're doing. The Gemara continues, students cannot teach in the presence of their teachers, right? You have to give the proper honor to your teacher. And that was that. Okay, let's say, right, we said that two judges really can sit in judgment. It's valid, but we say it's not really the best way to do it. Three judges, right? If let's say we have three judges, let's say two say yes, let's say, and one abstains. Now that's not enough. So we say, okay, now you have to add judges. And that's how, right, again, we add judges to make sure that we get the right amount, right? Now, the Gemara says, what's this idea of 3 and 2? Maybe there's a distinction. Maybe for a court case, you need 3, but for arbitration, you only need 2. And since we're talking about arbitration, we're going to talk more about that. But first, the Gemara says on Daf 6, right? If you have one judge and he made a mistake, what he did, but he needs to pay from his own money, right? To like restitution of the mistake that he made. Now the Gemara says, wait a minute, what kind of mistake did he make if you're saying he made a mistake, but the verdict stands? So the Gemara explains maybe it was a mistake of weighing opinions, right? Where, two rabbis said one thing and two rabbis said another thing. And most people hold by one opinion, but some people hold by the other opinion. And he ruled in that way. So it is a valid ruling, but it's not the right ruling, and therefore he needs to pay. Okay, we were talking about arbitration or coming to a compromise. So we see here that there is a machloket, there's a argument, a disagreement, if you need 3 judges for arbitration or 1 is enough. And the question is arbitration seen like a court case, therefore you need 3, or you can have 1 and that would be enough. Okay. Then the Gemara says, no, you always need 3 for a court case and for arbitration. Now, the Gemara says, wait a minute, what is arbitration? What's this compromise, right? So we say you cannot make a compromise when you're in the middle of a court case, right? And this is based on a verse that when you're in the middle of a court case, you need justice, you need mishpat. And we know that compromise is not justice, right? Again, the way we're interpreting the word justice is yes or no, right? Guilty, innocent. We know that compromise is not necessarily that, right? Right? If someone takes a plea deal, they're saying that they're guilty, but do they really think that they're guilty? No, like I'd rather get, right, a lower sentence than a more, than a harsher sentence. So the Gemara says that, right, strict halacha, the strict black and white law, that's called mishpat, that's justice. And that is Moshe, right? Moshe was all about justice. Aaron, right, his brother, was all about peace, right? He loved peace and compromise. And now, right, the question is compromise good or bad, right? And the Gemara goes through so many verses that talk about, right, botsea, which means to like compromise, and it brings some verses that express that it's a negative thing, right? It's negative because really there should be justice, right? So, right, if you try to do compromise, it's going to lead to blaspheming God. The Gemara says, wait, no, what are you talking about? That verse is really talking about something else, right? It's talking about someone who stole, and then they want to make a blessing on something that they stole. That's someone who is blaspheming, that's blaspheming God. right? There's a verse that says, Emet v'mishpat shalom, right? Truth, justice, peace, right? What does that mean, right? So one says that means compromise, right? And therefore it's a mitzvah, right? It's a positive thing to find a compromise, and therefore it is good, right? And the Gemara tells us that King David, did, right, mishpat for one person, right, justice for one, but righteousness for another, right? And therefore he would give them money if, let's say, he was a poor person and they needed money, he would give it from his own pocket. So now the Gemara says, if you started hearing a case and you don't know which way you're going to judge, right? You don't have all the information yet, you can still send them out for mediation, right? To come up with a compromise. But if you know what the verdict is, right? You heard all of the testimony and you know that the person is innocent or guilty, now it's too late. There's no such thing as a compromise after the judge already knows the verdict. Okay, now what about a judge who wants to recuse himself from the court case, right? So the Gemara tells us you can recuse yourself if you heard the case, but you still don't know which way you're going to give the verdict. But again, if you know you have all the information, now it's too late to recuse yourself. The Gemara tells us that you're not allowed to withhold testimony out of fear, right? You have to realize that when you are testifying in court, you are standing before God, right? That God is actually there in the courtroom. I wonder if that's where we get the hands on the Bible, tell the whole truth, right? I wonder if that's from here, right? But this concept is that God is in the courtroom, so you better make sure you're telling the truth. Daf number 7, a judge is allowed to suggest mediation or a compromise. The machloket is if it's a mitzvah or it's just permitted, right? Is it something he should do or something he just can do? And then the Gemara tells us, right, Aaron, he created the golden calf because of a compromise, right? Again, the Gemara is trying to show compromise isn't always good, right? He says that, right, look, they actually killed Hur beforehand, right? They asked Hur to build, this is all a midrash. The rabbis tell us that the people asked Hur to make the golden calf. He said no, so they killed him. Then they went to Aaron and they said, build the golden calf. And Aaron said, listen, I could either say no and they'll just kill me and ask somebody else, or I can do it and try to stall or try to get them to do tshuva afterwards, right? So he did it as a compromise, but I think the Gemara's point is sometimes compromise is not so good. Okay, right? And then the Gemara continues that once you know the verdict, you're not allowed to come to a compromise. Yes, next. The Gemara now interprets different verses that speak about justice and other things that have to do with trials, right? Also, right, it gives like good advice to people, right? So talks about when this has nothing to do with a court case, but it says that when a couple, like a husband and wife, when they're strong, they could be together even on a sword. When they're arguing, a 60 amma bed isn't big enough to hold the two of them. I thought that was very interesting. The Gemara brings verses talking about, right, God talking to the Jewish people from the ark, from the Aron, right? It doesn't really need a lot of space. Also, right, if a judge gives a true verdict, it brings the divine presence into the world. And if not, it causes the divine presence to leave. If a judge takes money from one person and gives it to another wrongfully, then God is going to take his soul That sounds very scary. But I think the point is the Gemara wants to scare people into being good judges. Right? A judge should always view himself as if a sword is hanging over him. Right? This is very serious. If the verdict is clear like day, you should render the verdict, and if not, then don't. Right? If if let's say 10 people sit in judgment, all of them share responsibility, right? And let's say there's a student, let's say there's a student present, he's also responsible, meaning if a student is there, meaning someone who is on a lower level, if he thinks that the judges made a mistake, he needs to tell his teacher. And the Gemara gives all these stories of rabbis who gathered like other rabbis to join them so that they would all be responsible, right? They didn't want to be the only ones responsible. If you appoint an unqualified judge over the people, it's as if you are planting an asherah, right? An asherah is a tree that was used for idol worship. If there are sages there and you don't appoint them, it's as if you built an altar for idolatry. Again, be very careful with who you appoint as a judge. You need to make sure that you hear one litigant only when the other litigant is present, right? You can't listen to testimony when the other litigant isn't there. You're not allowed to rule in favor of one litigant because you love him or against one of them because you hate them, right? Things that we have seen in the Torah over and over again. Okay, last daf for today, daf 8. The court cases that are, let's say, for very little money, you need to take them as seriously as if they were arguing over a lot of money, right? And Moshe was actually punished, the Gemara tells us, because he said, oh, if you have a difficult case, you can come and see me, which seemed to be a little haughty, and therefore he was punished. And when the daughters of Tzlofchad came and asked about inheritance law, which should remind you, we learned about it, right? We learned about it in Baba Batra. And when they came to him, he said, oh, I don't know that law, right? So the Gemara says it's a punishment because he implied that he knew everything. The Gemara says, no, it wasn't a punishment. It was actually because the Torah wanted to give the daughters of Tzlofchad the merit that law, right, inheritance law to daughters should be given in their name. Okay. A community needs to fear the judge, right? You have to realize that he has a lot of power and a lot of responsibility. Okay. The Mishnah told us that Zimun needs 3 people. What is Zimun? Now, you might think Zimun comes from what we do before we say Birkat HaMazon, before we say the grace after the meal. We have what's called a zimun, right? Where 3 people come together and they say a certain prayer. So the Gemara says, well, we know that already, so this must be something else. This is summoning someone to court. If you like, right? If it's like a court summons, right? If you want to summon someone, you need 3 judges to create that that summons. We said penalties need 3 judges and they have to be experts. Now we're going to talk about the concept of what's called motzi shem ra. Motzi shem ra literally means someone who liables, is that a word? Is that a verb? Someone who basically a man accuses his wife of not being a virgin when they got married, and basically says that she had relations with someone after they were already what's called, like, I don't want to use the word engaged, but after a rusin. Here it's like the first stage of marriage, so it's as if they're already married, and he claims that she had an affair, And if this is the case, she loses her rights to the ketuvah. That's from Masechet Ketuvot. And if it's proven that she had an affair, she's actually put to death. But that's only if the witnesses, like if there are witnesses that saw that she had relations with somebody else. Okay, that's the concept of Motzi Shemra. So our Mishnah says that even if there are no witnesses that saw her have an affair, right? If he claims that she had an affair, she's judged with 23 judges, right? Even though if there are no witnesses, it's not a capital case because there's no way she could be put to death without those witnesses, and therefore it's only a monetary case. We know that a monetary case should be 3 judges. So now we're going to discuss, do we need 3 or do we need 23? Okay. What's the issue? Maybe if we have 23 judges and it becomes a big deal, then everybody's going to talk about it. And then witnesses are going to come forward and say, oh, you're talking about Ruth? Oh, yeah, I saw her go into the motel with blah, 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 right? Meaning witnesses might come forward. And therefore, we need to start the case with 23 judges, right? Or maybe we're not concerned about that. And maybe 3 should be enough, right? And therefore, there's the machloket if it's 3 judges or 23 judges. Okay, so now the Gemara is going to give, we're going to give a few explanations to what this could be, and then we're going to pick it up next week with more explanations. So one option is maybe the husband did bring witnesses that she had an affair, but then, right, so therefore we need 23, but then the father of the bride brought witnesses, right, to prove that the bride was fine, and they discredit the first set of witnesses, right? Now the father wants to collect the money, right, because he defamed, right, is that a word? Right, his daughter's like reputation. So then you should be able to do it with 3 judges because we're only dealing with money. But if this didn't happen, then maybe you need 23 judges, right? Again, capital cases need 23 judges, but you also need witnesses and you need to have legal warning, right? We're going to learn more about this in this Masechet. It's called Hatra'ah. Hatra'ah means warning. The person, before they do the act, whatever it is, needs to be warned. Be careful. If you do that, you're going to be liable, right? Death. So don't do it, right? That's called warning. And only if you have all of these things can the person be killed. And right, there's actually a machloket, right? You have to say how you're going to be killed, right? I just said, don't do it, you're going to get killed. That might not be a valid warning. Maybe you actually have to say, don't do that, otherwise you're going to get stoned, right? And therefore that's accurate warning. Or maybe we're dealing with a woman who is very learned, my favorite, like that concept existed 2,000 years ago, not just in 2024, right? But the Gemara says, let's say we're dealing with a woman who's very learned, and we know that if we're dealing with a learned person, right, and here the Gemara implies male or female, they do not need warning because everybody knows that if you transgress this law, you're going to get punished. So if you're very learned, maybe, and it's a machloket, maybe you do not need warning. And therefore, again, maybe that's the case where you'll need 23 judges or maybe 3 judges. And with that, we finish our first lesson in Masechet Sanhedrin. I see we have a few minutes left, so if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer any questions or any comments about our new Masechet. And I want to wish everyone Chanukah Sameach, Those of you who are in Israel, it's already Hanukkah. Those of you who are not in Israel, it is not yet Hanukkah. And then we will pick it up our regular day next week, regular day, regular time, Be'ezrat Hashem. Okay, if anybody has any comments. Yes, Aliza.
If 323 and 71 reflect severity of the situation, and with 3 judges, a woman is violated, but to come over here for 23 judges when there's a man involved in a poor animal, sodomy, would you say anything that would help me understand that?
Okay, excellent. It's not necessarily severity. It has to do with, is the case a monetary case that is involved with just a financial penalty, or is it a capital case? I don't want to say unfortunately, we'll discuss it more as we continue. If somebody rapes a woman, definitely in the time of the Torah, it is not a capital offense. It is a monetary offense. They have to pay money, and they actually have to marry the woman because they have now ruined this girl, and people might not want to marry her. We can discuss it more.
No, I think I got it. I understand where you're coming from. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Again, it is very severe, but it's not a capital case.
Okay.
Okay. Yes. Any other comments, questions? Okay. Excellent. So Hanukkah Sameach, everyone. And welcome to all of you who are new. I hope to see you again next week. I hope everyone enjoyed, and wishing everyone a Hanukkah Sameach.
Hanukkah Sameach.
Thank you. Hanukkah Sameach.